Hello and welcome to Current Affairs on JTV. My guest today is Dr. Ghada Karmi, a leading Palestinian activist, academic, writer and BDS campaigner. She is a research fellow of the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter and is also formerly a vice chair of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Dr. Karmi, thank you very much for joining me here today. Let's start with the basics so that viewers at home can understand some of your positions. Do you believe that the State of Israel has the right to exist in its current form?
The short answer is no.
Why?
It does not have the right to exist for two reasons. First of all, no state has the right to exist. Britain exists, doesn't have the right to exist. It's not a notion which people use with regard to any state in the world except Israel. So, first, that's on that ground. Now, the second thing is, any state which practices the kind of policies, oppressive policies that the State of Israel does against an innocent people, the Palestinian people, that commits these abuses of their rights, of their human rights, that steals their territory, that expels them, certainly has not the right to be regarded as a state in the normal sense of the term. Cannot be accepted, no.
Okay, we'll come on to the sort of behaviour, as you put it, of Israel momentarily. Let's just stick on the sort of the formation of the state, though, because I think it's a key moment in your personal life, of course, as well. In your view, how was that state actually formed?
Well, it's not my view. It is. I'm sorry, but it is actually the case that Israel was formed on the basis of the expulsion of another people, the indigenous population, the Palestinian people, of whom I am one. That is how the state was formed, because it was formed as a Jewish majority state, which could not have been achieved given the population mix there was when Israel was created in 1948. Jews formed a third of the population of Palestine and could not have been a majority in a Jewish state unless the non-Jews were not there or not there in sufficient numbers to threaten the Jewish majority. That's what actually happened. It's a matter of historical fact, and I sit here before you and before the viewers as a living testament to the truth of that, because my family was expelled in 1948 to make way for Israel.
Now, I have no doubt, of course, as you've stated, you personally were affected by this, your family left, that's no question. But we've got to unpick some of the other things you've just said there, because as you are fully aware, the State of Israel was created at the United Nations, and it was created in the form of an organized partition where the land was split between a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted that, even though if you look at the borders, they weren't particularly propitious, and indeed the state was divided, as you'll remember the sort of maps, and the sort of Arab part did not accept that partition, leading to a conflict which led to your family having to leave, and then the establishment of the state in a somewhat larger form. Would you accept that happened?
No, of course not. That's not what happened. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Would you mind? I'll have to
Please.
put it straight for you. No. There was a UN resolution that was passed in 1947, which recommended that the land of Palestine should be divided between what was called an Arab state and a Jewish state. It was never implemented. We must be very clear about that. It was never, ever
So the vote
implemented.
supporting that, you say, has no relevance?
No, I didn't say that. I said I'm trying to set the historical record straight. That was never implemented. It sat on the UN record of resolutions. Israel was created.
Passed. You'll accept it was passed.
It was passed. Oh yes, I'm talking about it was not implemented. That's what I said. Okay. Now in 1948, Israel was created not by the United Nations. I really have to make that quite clear. If there's anybody under this misconception, in 1948, it was not created by the United Nations. It created itself. It declared the creation of the State of Israel, a very famous speech by David Ben-Gurion at the time, and recognized by various world states Israel was only admitted as a member state of the United Nations in 1949. So that is the issue. Now, nobody had fought the Jews as a state, according in your account, until 1948. Not 1947 was the resolution recommending partition. 48 to 49 was the Arab-Israeli War. So that's what happened.
Sure, but the partition was indeed to be into two states, correct? So when you say nobody had thought of the Jews as a state, the UN clearly in 1947 envisaged a Jewish state, and that's what the partition was about.
Yes. Look, I've said in 1947 the United Nations passed a resolution which recommended a partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Mm-hmm. It was never implemented. It never came into being. In 1948, the Jews in Palestine declared themselves to be a state. And in the ensuing war, the Jews, the Zionist Jews in Palestine, conquered territory over and above what the UN had allotted for the Jewish state. So by 1949, the borders of the State of Israel that we knew from 48 to 67 were created as a result of that war. So that's what actually happened.
Well, that is correct, except of course you've missed out one part of that, which is that after that declaration by Ben-Gurion, hostilities were then announced by Arab neighbors against the State of Israel.
No, I haven't disputed that. I mean, we didn't mention that.
We didn't
that's
mention
why
that.
I said there's an Arab-Israeli war.
Okay. But the key part is who declared hostilities. Okay, let's not get caught up on history in that sense. There's clearly a sort of discussion about that.
No, but why it's important, you see, is because of 48, we were expelled from Jerusalem because it was to be included in the new Israel. That's the point. So 700,000 Palestinians lost their homes as a result of this declaration by the Zionists in Palestine to create the State of Israel. That's how Israel came into being. A year later, the UN accepted it as a member. Well, but it had already been established.
We'll talk about the refugees in a moment because that's an important aspect of this. But one thing I'm curious about, last year, for example, you firstly claimed that the foundation of the State of Israel was a stitch-up from beginning to end by the United Nations. And you also said the Jews in Palestine were groups of foreign immigrants trying to behave as though they were indigenous, and added, it is a foreign community who just turned up. So can you not see any historical connection at all between the Jewish people and the State of Israel, the land of Israel? Can you see no connection there at all?
It depends which Jewish people you're talking about. In the Middle East, and in Palestine in particular, there always was a Jewish group, a minority in fact, for centuries. And they were what we used to call our Jews. That is, they were Arab Jews. That's how we regarded them. The same in Iraq, by the way, the same in North Africa and so on. These were really Jewish Arabs. And that's exactly how we saw them, and that's, I think, how they saw themselves. So they were culturally the same as us, and they certainly had a history, as well as us having history in that country, of course. The problem, you see, arose when groups of Jews who came from Poland, Lithuania, 80% of European Jewry comes from that part of the world which is between Poland and Lithuania. These people then, at the end of the 19th century, started to a movement which said, we come from a Middle Eastern country, and we're going to go there and so on and so forth, Zionism. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we cannot accept that, and anybody who's got any sense cannot accept that.
Why is that?
Because they are not of the region. These people are Europeans.
Well, well, hold on a second.
Well, they're Europeans.
What were the, let's just, you say the minority of Jews who were there. What were those Jews doing in Palestine?
Living with us. We all lived together.
Why were they there? Where had they come from?
They were part of the ancient indigenous population of Palestine. They were part of it.
Or we could call it another name, they were part of the Jewish kingdom of what was once Palestine.
No, there was at one historical period, there was a short space of time in which there was a kingdom of Israel.
But by short, you mean several hundred years?
No, it wasn't several hundred years, it was much shorter than that. But the point about it is
Where's your basis for saying it's shorter? What are you defining as the Jewish state?
Listen, please, I mean, if we're going to have a discussion about history, let's have a discussion about history. There was at one time a small kingdom of Israel within Palestine. Over the centuries and eons of time, there have been various peoples who have inhabited that area. One of those groups were called Israelites at one point, and the Israelites then had a religion of their own. There were offshoots. Nobody quite knows where they came from, but they were probably offshoots of Canaanites. And then, in the course of history, the kingdom of Israel, which was short-lived, came and went, like many other things came and went in that country. We're talking about the 20th, the end of the 19th century and the 20th centuries today.
I accept that, but the key why I'm raising this is those Jews who stated they were from the Middle East are stating that they are the descendants of the people who were expelled at the end of the Jewish kingdom's period in time. Do you not accept that?
No.
Why
They weren't expelled. They're the people who stayed there. They weren't expelled and then came back.
Forgive me.
I think there's a misunderstanding.
You're familiar with the history of the Roman Empire and of the Roman Empire with Palestine. You are familiar with what happens when the Romans invade Judea, destroy the Jewish temple, so forth, so on, yes? So you do not accept...
where's this going?
Well, where this is going is you don't accept there was an expulsion or Jews left as refugees
There are
at that
some
period.
expulsions, but not very many, no.
So you're saying that the Jews... Are you in a sense saying 19th century European Jews are not the descendants of those people who were expelled?
That is precisely what I'm saying.
And who are they then?
Converts.
Converts?
They're converts. They're the children, descendants of converts. Please, I mean, look, can I just say this to viewers? If you're really interested in this, please look up the history. Not Zionist histories, but histories which will explain what happened in terms of conversion to Judaism. There was a lot of conversion going on in the early centuries. And part of the converted people were in a kingdom at the time called the Khazar Kingdom, which was on the Russian steppes.
You're referencing the Shlomo Sand's book, for example.
Shlomo Sand, Arthur Koestler before him, and by the way, medieval Arab geographers before them. So these sources, this historical narrative is attested, and it makes a lot of sense. Because, by the way...
It may well make sense to you.
Well, of course it does.
Challenged and contested.
I'll tell you, on a very lay level, just look at Western Jews. Look at them. Look how they look. They look exactly as anybody would look who comes from where they come. So if you have a Polish Jew, he looks Polish. If you look at a Russian Jew, he looks Russian, and so on. You look at a German Jew, looks German.
Does a British Jew look British?
Well, my point is, but
no, the point
I'm trying to make, listen, the point I'm trying to make,
physiological aspects.
No, please follow the point. The point I'm trying to make to you is that the way that genetics works is that you tend to have the same physical characteristics as the area in which you live and are born, etc. I look the way I look because I'm Arab, because I come from a region of the world where Arabs live. European Jews look European because they are Europeans, okay? Now, why I'd really like to cut this short, and I'll tell you why. Because even if it were the case, that the blonde, blue-eyed Jews looking like Ariel Sharon came from my country, Palestine, thousands of years ago, does it give those people the right to come to that area on the basis of their ancestors, even if they could prove it, having been there 2,000 years ago plus, and set themselves up at my expense? Please answer me this question.
But let's just look at that for a second.
No, does it?
No, that's an important question. But it relates to the period before the Jewish state came into existence. Here you had a period where Jews existed with Arabs living in the Mandate of Palestine, and they weren't there because they just suddenly arrived. They were there because they'd bought land.
No.
They were there because they'd bought land. They owned land legitimately.
Well, let me give you a fact then. By 1948, less than 7% of the land of Palestine was in Jewish ownership. That is a statistic, you can look it up, okay? So they did not buy land. A minority bought some land, so they were not there by right of having bought land. They were there by immigration, brought in by the British. That's what happened, okay?
Brought in by the British now, so not
brought in under the British mandate.
But not in under the Ottoman lands.
No. I've already explained there was a minority of Arab Jews which had been with us long before the mandate. With the British mandate, the mandate had a policy of supporting Zionism, so they opened the gates of Palestine to European Jews coming in. And, you know, these are facts.
Let's take it another way. It's interesting you'll stress that subsequent generations don't necessarily inherit the rights of their ancestors. It's notable, for example, that UNRWA, the agency UNRWA, declares that Palestinians pass on their refugee status, uniquely in the modern world, to their children if they're operating in UNRWA areas. Do you think that's fair and correct legally?
Yes, yeah. Of course I do.
Why? But they're passing on something.
Listen to me. 70 years, I'm alive. I'm still alive, you know.
And you're a refugee. No one denies that.
70 years only have passed. You're going to tell me that in 70 years I lose my right to my country
not your right.
when somebody from Germany doesn't lose his right after 2,000 years. Look, please, if this interview is going to be about this nonsense,
well, it's not nonsense.
then it's a waste of time.
You're saying there's clearly a time limit.
No, it's
a time limit within which.
Look, it's a waste of time to argue over things like that. The reality is, anybody with any common sense knows, you don't go around going to different parts of the world and saying, my ancestors were here thousands of years ago, therefore it's mine, and you clear off, I'm going to take your place. This is simple.
But Dr. Karmi, I'm asking a very simple question about the status of refugees that's passed on. No one's questioning your status. You're a refugee, no one's questioning that. Are your children refugees?
My children have the right to return to the homeland of their mother.
Are they?
All right? So, it's very simple.
Well, are they refugees?
What's the point you want to make? No. Come on. Because
I'm giving you a UN position.
No.
I'm giving you a United Nations position,
no.
which is something that UNRWA, a UN agency, states.
I've already answered you, and I have told you that people who were expelled 70 years ago have the right to return to their homeland. Now, what is the point you want to make?
Their descendants don't.
Excuse me. Do you think that a Jew who traces his ancestry to 2,000 years has the right to go to Palestine and throw me out? Answer this question.
I'm not suggesting throwing you out.
No, answer please.
I'm saying that the framework of 1947 allowed a way for two peoples to live in two states. And it comes directly on to something I'd like to talk to you about, which is your prescription for the current status of where we are at with the peace talks and all that. Because as you know, the international community have, for a long time, stated the mantra that there are two states for two peoples, that's the only viable solution. But you have recently argued somewhat against it. One of your books, Marriage to Another Man, Israel's Dilemma in Palestine, essentially states that solution is not going to be two states, and that's failed, but a one-state solution. Do you think that's still true today?
Fine. Look, I'm happy to answer you if you put your questions in a genuine spirit of inquiry.
Well,
if it is in a spirit to constantly contradict points of plain and simple common sense, it's very difficult to talk.
Dr.
Are you interested in my views?
Of course, Dr.
Good. Well, if you are,
you're an academic.
If you are interested in my views,
we want to discuss views, and as you know, the base of academic discourse is evidential, and secondly, the ability to challenge one another on that.
Yes, but
I want to hear your views.
Yes.
Of course I do, which is why I'm asking about that. But I'd also like to know the basis on which they are derived from.
Because
if you're saying these are just my views and that's just the way it is, that's not going to work, is
and
it?
that's very unfair. I have made repeated reference to historical fact. Anybody can check what I'm saying. These are not my views. So the fact that Palestine was overtaken by people from outside the country in the name of whatever, a claim on whatever, is wrong.
Well, okay.
It is wrong.
You can say that. We've had a bit of a to and fro about that. That's fine. What I'm curious about now, though, is your belief. Is a one-state solution the solution as far as you see it? A state where everyone lives together in one place?
Okay, fine. In order for me to explain this, let me just start off by telling you that partitioning Palestine is a bad idea. It's something I, as a Palestinian, do not accept. I'm being asked to divide my country between me, part of the indigenous people, and outsiders, foreigners to my country, who came along under a colonial regime, which is the British regime, and established themselves by force. So, the very principle of partitioning the country between these newcomers and the indigenous people like myself is rejected by me. Okay? So that's my starting point.
Good. Okay.
Now, we have today in my country a population of Jewish Israelis. These people have come from different parts of the world and have established themselves in my country. So they've done this at the expense of the people who used to live there, that is my countrymen and women, including myself. No, it's all right, I'm getting there.
Okay.
So the question becomes, insofar as I and the people who are expelled have a right to return to our homeland, but there is currently a large number of Jewish immigrant Israelis, and many of them now born in Palestine, the question then becomes, what do we do about this? Given my starting premise, partition is not the answer, and there is a real need here to accommodate the needs of the refugees, the people who were expelled, and the people who now live there, and the need of the Jewish population which lives there. All right? So that's fair, isn't it? There is a need to do that. I am saying the only way those can be reconciled is if we live together in that country. People call it one state, whatever you want to call it, but it is the same place. They live together and they have a democracy, they have a proper democratic system whereby they are properly represented and they live their lives and try to get used to each other. That is what I'm suggesting.
Do you believe that's remotely realistic, though?
Now, in terms of, I don't know, how do you mean realistic?
Well, let me explain why. The whole history of the last century has been, essentially, the proof around the world that putting two peoples with a different history together doesn't work. So in Europe, in numerous European countries, we've seen the, I suppose, ethnic cleansing. And it happens recently. The Balkans, for example, have seen ethnic cleansing in the last 20 years.
Indeed, indeed.
The Middle East, if you look at the Middle East, the last 5, 6, 10 years has seen vast ethnic cleansing. Syria, Iraq, that process as well. Given that backdrop, how is it remotely realistic to put together two peoples who haven't lived together for some time in that way, in one state, and expect it to work?
Indeed. Now, but then I want to answer this in this way. You see, when one produces a political idea, and this is a political idea, there are two aspects to it. The first aspect is it desirable? In other words, is it a good idea? And the second aspect is it feasible? Okay? Now, our problem with the one-state idea, bringing Israelis, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians together, is that nobody is willing, or very few people are willing, to answer the first question. They jump immediately, as you have done, to the feasibility argument, which says it's not going to happen, it can't happen, it's not realistic. Now, I say, let's look at the first question. Is it a good idea? Is it desirable? Right? Now, is it desirable? I would say it's very desirable. I would say it's a very good idea. I would say it's much better to learn to make up, reconcile, and live with people than to fight them and steal their land. That's what I would say. I wish that the argument could just start from there. Now, let me go on. If one could get a consensus, a large enough consensus which says, look, this is a good idea, okay? Then we move on to the next question is, how do we do it? So that's the way I'd like this to be thought about.
Well, I understand that, of course. In general terms, the idea of people living together with one another around the world, wherever it is in the world, everyone would regard that as being a desirable thing. We would all want all conflict to cease. We'd want neighbours to live happily with each other. But the fact is that history teaches us, unfortunately, that while it may be desirable, it is not feasible. And there is the problem. We have seen multi-ethnic states time and time again collapse and be dissipated by the contradictions in having, for whatever reason, people of different types living and working together in those areas. They collapse, they end up in ethnic cleansing. We've seen it in our own lifetime, sadly. How do we get around that historical fact? That's the issue we're talking about, because it's one thing to stress something desirable, it's quite another to see that become reality when history tells you that the odds are very much against you.
Well, you see, this is why I think probably my point about desirability I haven't explained it adequately to you. The issue about desirability is really very important. It's not some banal cliche about, oh, isn't it nice, we all want to get on with each other. That's not what it is. The idea is something that everybody would accept is hard, it's hard even to envisage. But is it worth pursuing, if you like? That's the other way I could put it. Is it worth pursuing? Now, if only there were a very large number of people who agreed with me that it was worth pursuing, then I think we would find a way. Let me tell you, it's not as hopeless as you obviously think it is, because I am in touch with, and I can assure you, there are groups now in Israel, Palestinians, Jewish Israelis working together on the one-state idea. There are groups in Ramallah, which is under occupation now by the Israelis, who are working with Jews living in pre-1948 Israel. These things are happening. So it's not really hopeless. And I think, you see, it's worth fighting for.
No one doubts there are people who support what you're saying, but you'll accept that it is not the majority opinion in either the Jewish state of Israel or the Palestinian Authority areas or even in Gaza. You would accept that?
I do, yes.
What's going on then in say, the Palestinian areas? Why do Palestinians not accept your point of view?
Well,
why do they want, for example, why does the Palestinian Authority still want a two-state solution?
Well, and I can explain that quite easily. You see, the two-state solution idea was not a Palestinian idea. I mean, it came about quite differently. But the important thing about the two-state thing, why the Palestinian leadership accepts it, and many Palestinians have learned to accept it, is really the question of saying, well, let's get something. It's better than nothing. See what I mean? So if you've actually lost all your country and it's being ruled by Israel, which is what the current situation is, one school of thought would say, well, isn't it better we get a fifth of our homeland back, which is what the two-state solution is. It provides 20% of Palestine. Let's get a fifth of our homeland back, better than zero of our homeland. That is the thinking behind it. Now, in addition, because there's grown up an international consensus that this would be the right way forward, you know, the two-state solution, of course, the Palestinian leadership says, well, we've got some support for this. So why not, you know, let's take it. We've got some support. It's not something just we are begging, and you know, Israel is just saying, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to give it to you. That's what the explanation is. It's not because it's ideal. No, that should be quite clear.
But herein lies the interesting part of this. Look around the world. There is nowhere around the world where there is an ideal solution to long-running conflicts. Every single solution you look at involves a messy compromise of some kind, where neither side gets what they really want. Neither side wants the ideal they've set out for. It seems to me that what you're suggesting is we ignore the possibility of anything other than the ideal solution, when that is, again, not met by any other sort of situation around the world where you get conflict in that way. There's always a messy compromise, but you're saying ignore that. They're wrong to go for the two-state solution idea, even if it's not ideal, because it's not the whole cake. And isn't that part of the problem? Isn't that the real reason why we haven't had peace between Israelis and Palestinians for the last 70 years? Because they're not willing to, to agree to anything other than the ideal solution.
No, the fact is, it's not about ideal solutions. It's about the fact that Israel has not made it possible to have two-state solution. Even supposing, supposing I'm not a supporter of the two-state solution, as I've made clear. But supposing I were, Israel has foreclosed that option. There is no way we can have a two-state solution because Israel doesn't allow it.
Why is that?
Well, because it's colonized most of the West Bank, because Israel isn't moving out of Palestinian territory. Israel is consolidating its hold on Palestinian land.
You can have any agreement you want if you just agree to it. So in the sense, I don't mean you personally, I mean in general, if two sides sit down, any agreement they want could at a stroke of a pen happen. So let's just take your example. You're saying Israel is colonizing the West Bank. I presume you're meaning the settlements of this context.
Of course, yes.
Right. So let's imagine that there was a discussion between the Israelis and the Palestinians where both sides agreed the settlements will be withdrawn from X, Y, Z places and Palestinians will take over. Do you not think that's possible?
No, it's not, because you tell me, when has Israel offered to leave? When has it left anything?
But we know of we've seen all the various peace negotiations since '94, whether it is at Taba or at Camp David or the Olmert plan, where plans are put down saying the Israelis are happy to leave, and all that's missing is a Palestinian... Well, hang on.
But they haven't left.
But forgive me, Dr. Karmi, it needs, surely, for them to leave, it needs the other side to sign on to the agreement to say, fine, these are the terms, both sides have agreed it, now you fulfill your bit, leaving, and we'll fulfill ours. Why would the Israelis unilaterally leave before the Palestinians sign a document saying they agree to those terms?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I'm finding this conversation between us very difficult. I'll tell you why. Because there are facts which are simply ignored and glossed over, I'm afraid, by your side. And it's impossible to keep saying, no, it's not this, and no, it's not that. The reality is, let's try and put this, because I'm concerned with the viewers, really. Look, the reality is that Israel is very powerful. and the Palestinians are very weak. Israel is in occupation of Palestinian land. Israel is able to, not only able, but it has been, its occupation of Palestinian territories has been condemned by the United Nations. It is illegal, it is against international law. They are the ones who have to leave. They have shown no inclination to leave. They have, on the contrary, increased their settlements. They increased them even as we're speaking. Now, in a situation like this, why do you want to turn the discussion into one where the weak party, the colonized party, the occupied party, that is the Palestinians, are the ones who are apparently in control of this process?
Well, forgive me, in a negotiation, there are two sides. If you're saying the Israelis are constantly colonizing, and an agreement is signed where the Israelis agree to decolonize, if that's the case, if that's how you want to look at it, what is to stop the Palestinians from signing that agreement, getting rid of the Israelis who have colonized? Because that's what the agreements in the past have allowed for.
There has never been an agreement that Israel has agreed to. Look, no, there really hasn't. No, you've got to understand that the Israelis are in control of this situation. It is very obvious. If you don't recognize it, the viewers know it. The Israelis are in control. They are the sovereign in Palestine. This is very obvious. Let me put this in another way, because it's really impossible to talk like this with two completely different kind of ideas which don't meet at all and are not related to reality, with great respect to you. The reality is that the whole Israeli project from the beginning was a colonizing project. Let's face it, and let's look facts in the face. Enough of this nonsense. The Israelis, the Zionists took over the land of Palestine, and they did it by war, and they did it with the help of imperial powers, mainly Britain. That's what actually happened. Now, that was done at the expense of the Palestinian people, the indigenous people, who then became refugees. That's the story. From that moment on to this, it's been a story of increasing colonization of the rest of Palestine by the Israeli state. That's what actually happened. Now, it grieves me, I tell you, it saddens me that instead of people seeing this obvious injustice, they harangue the victim. They demand that the victim produces solutions and answers for themselves and answers for the victor rather. Why haven't you done this? Why don't you move out of that? Why don't you do this? The only power in Israel-Palestine is Israel. Okay? It's Israel. Israel is illegally occupying other people's lands. Israel has to leave.
Your contention is it illegally occupies the whole land, right?
Its occupation of the pre-1967 territory was legalized after the event by the United Nations.
And you're happy with that?
But I'm not happy with that. I'm just telling you a fact. Okay. However, from 1967 to this day, Israel is in occupation of the rest of Palestine, which the United Nations has decreed is illegal. Okay? So please answer me, why don't they leave? Why don't they obey international law and leave?
And my answer is simply, as I've put to you several times, they've tried to leave on many occasions by signing a document with the Palestinians to leave. Okay, let's look at something different, which is to do with the nature of that occupation. Last year, at a conference in Cork, in Ireland, you directly compared Israel's actions with regards to Palestinians with Nazi atrocities against Jews. The word...
I didn't.
Well, hang on.
No, I didn't.
Well, let me quote what you said, and then we can talk about it. So, a previous lecturer, not you, had used the word Untermensch within a lecture, which, as you know, was a favoured Nazi term. In response to that, you raised a point. You said, I just felt I had to say something about the use of the word Untermensch. The equivalent in English is subhuman. And subhuman is how people in Gaza feel that they are being treated by the Israeli army. And you continued, we are not allowed to use words that the Nazis used as if they were true and unique only to what Nazis did to the Jews. It is not right. For Palestinians, I don't think they make a distinction between what happened to the Jews in Germany and what is happening to them. That is something we need to remember. So you have made a comparison there, direct comparison between Jews in Germany, Nazis attacking
No,
them.
I haven't.
You
It's very
certainly
clear.
have.
No.
As if they were true and unique only to what the Nazis
No,
did to the
it's
Jews.
very clear what I'm saying.
What are you saying?
There is it's very clear there is a vocabulary which has become so linked to the Holocaust that nobody literally dares use these words in any other context. And the point I was making, which is obvious to anybody who's ever visited Gaza, is that the treatment of Gazans by the Israelis is the treatment you mete out to what you would call a subhuman species. Now, in Germany, in German, that's the word Untermensch, and that's exactly what the context was. So I really think it's important to understand the context.
But why do you want to use Nazi-era words and terms
to
describe that situation?
I didn't.
But why do you think it's valid to do so?
I didn't.
But you were defending the validity of that usage.
No, I didn't. A previous speaker, who, by the way, was Jewish, had in fact used the term. I made the point, which is very clear, you've read it, I made the point that we cannot restrict vocabulary. It's not right, you know. If something is what it is, Untermensch means subhuman.
So
and the Gazans are treated as subhumans.
So do you think the Israelis are treating the Palestinians in the same way that Nazis treated the Jews?
I can tell you that many Palestinians who are the recipients of this treatment feel that.
Do you feel that?
Look, I don't have a description in terms of they're Nazis and they're pagans and the treatment by the treatment that Israel metes out to the Palestinians is evil. It's pernicious, it's unjust, it's oppressive, and it's evil. I think that's probably quite enough way of describing it.
But you wouldn't compare it to the way the Nazis treated the Jews, you personally?
No, I mean, I'm not interested in comparing it to the Nazis. Not at all. It's good enough for me.
And if someone did, would they be right or wrong?
I can't speak for them. I'm not speaking for other people.
Simple question.
I'm not speaking for other people. I'm telling you.
I'm saying, if you heard someone else say that analogy, do you think they'd be right or wrong in using it?
Depends in what sense they were using it. It entirely depends in what sense they're using it.
So do you think, let's put it another way then, do you think the Israelis are committing a campaign of genocide against the Palestinians?
I have to tell you, in Gaza, yes, it has crossed my mind more than once. Gaza.
On what basis? On what basis?
On the basis that these people are starved, they have very little fuel, their water is polluted, they're not allowed to leave, disease is rife, malnutrition, the percentage of malnourished people is very high. I don't know what you would call it. I call it...
genocide?
Some people have certainly used it. It has crossed my mind, yes.
So
it has.
You're saying, essentially, that the Israelis are engaged in a deliberate campaign to kill Palestinians. That's what genocide is.
I don't know what they're doing. All I can tell you is, I don't know what's in their minds. All I can tell you is the effect of their actions is genocidal. Yes.
Right. Dr. Karmi, I think we've run out of time on this. I want to thank you for sharing your views. I hope you agree. I have given you time to put them out. And it will be interesting to see what the viewers do indeed think of this. And thank you for joining us at home. We look forward to hearing more from you in due course. Thank you.
To stay up to date with the latest JTV content, if you're on YouTube, click subscribe below the video and the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, click the like button, and under following, click see first.